Most towns make sense. These don't. One sits in the hottest place in America, and people still live there year-round. One has no road to the mainland. Another is part of the United States, but you have to drive through Canada just to reach it. These aren't ghost towns. They're real communities. And somehow, against every practical reason, they still exist. Chicken, Alaska. There are towns that feel remote. And then there's Chicken, Alaska. In the winter, the population drops to just a handful of people. No hospital, no major stores, and for long stretches of the year, the outside world feels almost unreachable. Snow covers everything, roads become difficult, and daily life slows to whatever the environment allows. Even the name feels like something that shouldn't exist. It was supposed to be called ptarmigan, after a local bird that people hunted for food, but no one in the town could agree on how to spell it. After enough debate, they gave up and chose something simpler, chicken. And somehow, that fits the place. Chicken sits deep in Alaska's interior, far from any major city. The nearest town with basic services is over 100 miles away, and getting there can take hours depending on the season. Supplies are limited, winters are long, and temperatures can drop far below zero. In most cases, places like this don't last. They fade as people leave for somewhere easier, somewhere more connected. But Chicken didn't disappear. A small number of people stayed, building a life in a place that was never designed to be convenient, not because it made sense, but because they chose it. And that choice is the only reason this town still exists at all. Loving County, Texas. This isn't a town, it's something bigger. Loving County, Texas is officially the least populated county in the United States. Not town, county. An entire administrative region with fewer people than most apartment buildings. Fewer than 100 residents live here, spread across wide stretches of West Texas desert. There's no real town center, no main street, no sense of a place where everything comes together. Just scattered homes, open land, and long distances between them. And yet, it functions. There's a courthouse, a sheriff. Elections still happen. The structure of a full county government exists even if the population barely fills a single block anywhere else. In most places, something this small wouldn't be its own county. It would be absorbed, combined, or simply redefined as part of somewhere larger. But Loving County never was. It remains separate, holding on to a level of identity that seems far larger than the number of people who actually live here, which makes it feel less like a place defined by population and more like a boundary that never changed, even as everything around it did. Darwin, California. It looks like a ghost town, but it isn't. This is Darwin, California. At first glance, everything about this place feels abandoned. Weathered buildings, empty streets, old signs fading under the desert sun. It has the appearance of somewhere people left behind a long time ago. But a small number of people never did. Fewer than 50 residents still live here, scattered across a town that barely functions in the traditional sense. There's no real downtown, no steady flow of visitors, and very little that resembles normal infrastructure. What exists instead is a loose collection of homes, remnants of an earlier time, and people who chose to stay anyway. Darwin was once a mining town, built around the kind of opportunity that usually disappears as quickly as it arrives. When the mines declined, most people left, and places like this are usually erased not long after. But this one wasn't. What remains feels suspended, somewhere between past and present. Not abandoned, but not exactly alive in the way most towns are. And that's what makes it strange. Because Darwin doesn't exist for any clear reason anymore. It just continues. Lajitas, Texas. For most of the 20th century, Lajitas was a trading post, a border crossing, and not much else. Sitting along the Rio Grande in the Big Bend region of West Texas, it was the kind of place you passed through on the way to somewhere more interesting. Then came Clay Henry. In the 1980s, Lajitas got a mayor who was a goat. Not a metaphor, not a mascot, an actual billy goat, officially recognized as the head of the local government. Clay Henry was famous for drinking beer, accepting it directly from bottles offered by tourists. When he died, his son, Clay Henry Jr., took office. Then, Clay Henry III. The tradition outlasted the joke and became part of the town's identity. The town itself was eventually purchased by a private developer and transformed into a luxury resort community. Rooms, golf, guided river trips, while somehow retaining the eccentric edge that made it strange in the first place. It sits roughly 100 miles from the nearest town of any size, reachable only by long desert roads that most people don't take by accident. Lajitas exists today as something rare, a place that leaned into its own absurdity, turned isolation into atmosphere, and found that there's a market for somewhere that plays by entirely different rules. Ekalaka, Montana. There are no dramatic headlines about Ekalaka, no extreme temperatures, no history of a famous con artist, no goat mayor. What Ekalaka has, and what makes it genuinely hard to explain, is simply distance. The town sits in Carter County, Montana, more than 100 miles from the nearest interstate and over 2 hours from Billings, the closest city of any real size. It's the county seat of one of the least populated counties in the United States, home to fewer than 1,500 people spread across nearly 3,400 square miles. Towns like this are supposed to fade. When there are no economic anchors, no new industries pulling people in, no geographic advantage, the pattern is usually slow decline until there's nothing left. That's what happened to hundreds of similar communities across the Great Plains over the past century. Ekalaka didn't follow the script. It still has a school, a medical clinic, a few local businesses, and a dinosaur museum, the Carter County Museum that has quietly become one of the more respected paleontological collections in the region. Significant fossils have been found in the surrounding Badlands for over a century, giving the town a small but genuine claim to scientific importance. It's not growing, but it hasn't shrunk to nothing. In a part of the country where towns disappear quietly and without ceremony, that kind of stubborn persistence is its own form of remarkable. Tangier Island, Virginia. The residents of Tangier Island speak with an accent that linguists have compared to 17th century English, an artifact of the island's isolation so complete that its dialect evolved separately from the mainland for generations. Some researchers believe it's the closest surviving example of how early English colonists once sounded. That isolation has a cost. Tangier sits in the Chesapeake Bay, about 12 miles from the Virginia shore. It has no bridge, no causeway, a ferry runs when weather allows. The island has been losing land to erosion and rising sea levels for decades, losing it measurably, at a rate that Army Corps of Engineers studies have tracked carefully. Some estimates suggest the island could become uninhabitable within 20 to 30 years if nothing is done. And yet, roughly 450 people still live here. Kids go to school on the island. Watermen still go out before dawn to pull blue crabs from the bay, a tradition continuous since the 1600s. There are churches, a small airstrip for medical emergencies, and a community that has been defined for 400 years by the water around it. For the people who remain, leaving isn't simply a practical decision. It would mean abandoning a way of life that no other place on earth replicates. That's not stubbornness. That's something harder to name an attachment so deep that it outweighs the math. Green Bank, West Virginia. No signal, no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth. In most of the United States, that would feel like a problem. In Green Bank, West Virginia, it's the rule. The town sits inside the National Radio Quiet Zone, a 13,000 square mile area where wireless signals are heavily restricted. Cell service doesn't work, internet access is limited. Even everyday devices have to be carefully controlled. And it's not just a precaution. At the center of it all is one of the largest radio telescopes on Earth, designed to detect faint signals from deep space. It's so sensitive that even a small electronic interference can disrupt its work. At one point, scientists traced unexplained noise back to something as simple as an electric blanket being used miles away. So the town adapted. Around 30 people live here, building routines without the constant connection most of the world depends on. Landlines replace smartphones, daily life moves a little slower, a little quieter. For some, that's the appeal. A few residents even moved here on purpose, choosing a place where the digital noise disappears. In a country built on constant connectivity, Green Bank exists by doing the exact opposite. And that's the only reason it still works. Point Roberts, Washington. To reach this town, you have to leave the United States. Drive north, cross into Canada, travel a few miles, then go through another border checkpoint just to arrive. Only then are you back in the US. This is Point Roberts, Washington. On a map, it looks like a mistake. A small piece of land cut off from the rest of the country, surrounded by water on 3 sides and Canada on the 4th. It exists because of a line drawn in 1846, when no one paid much attention to this narrow strip of land. And now, people live here. About 1,300 residents have built a normal life in a place that isn't connected to the rest of their own country. Simple errands turn into international trips, kids cross the border daily for school, Even a drive to the nearest major city means carrying a passport. Then, for a brief period, that system broke. When the Canadian border closed during the pandemic, Point Roberts was effectively cut off. Supplies became harder to access. Travel became restricted. A town that already depended on another country suddenly couldn't reach it. And yet, it adapted. Life continued in a place that geography never fully made sense of, a town that exists not because it's practical, but because it was drawn that way on a map. Furnace Creek, Death Valley, California. On the 10th of July, 1913, a weather station at Furnace Creek recorded an air temperature of 134 degrees Fahrenheit. It remains the highest reliably recorded air temperature in Earth's history. The ground surface temperature that day was estimated at over 200 degrees. Death Valley exists in a geographic pressure cooker, a valley floor sitting 282 feet below sea level, ringed by mountain ranges that trap heat and block moisture. The average high in July is 116 degrees. Annual rainfall averages less than 2 inches. It is, by any environmental metric, one of the most hostile places on the planet for sustained human life. Furnace Creek, the valley's main settlement, has a permanent population of around 73 people, most employed by the Park Service or the resort that operates here. They live and work inside what is essentially a managed pocket of survivability. Shade, water systems, air conditioning, and supply lines running in from distant cities. Without those systems, Furnace Creek would empty within days. What's striking isn't just that people live here. It's that visitors come voluntarily over 1 million per year to experience somewhere that actively resists human comfort. They arrive, take photographs of the thermometer signs, and often describe the heat as something beyond weather, something closer to elemental. Furnace Creek isn't proof that humans can live anywhere. It's proof that they will try, given the right infrastructure and a sufficiently strong reason to stay. Amboy, California. The sign is still on, bright, clean, standing alone in the middle of the desert like nothing ever changed. This is Amboy, California. There's a gas station, a motel, a cafe, everything you'd expect from a small roadside town, but something feels off. There are almost no people. No movement, just heat, silence, and a place that looks like it's waiting for traffic that stopped decades ago. And that's exactly what happened. Amboy existed because of Route 66. For years, every car heading west had to pass through here. Fuel, food, a place to rest. This town had a purpose. Then the interstate came. Traffic shifted, cars stopped coming, businesses closed. Towns like this were supposed to disappear quietly, left behind by a road no longer needed. But Amboy didn't. It was bought, maintained, kept alive just enough that when you arrive today, it still feels real. The gas station works. The sign still lights up. The buildings are still standing. Not abandoned, not thriving, just still here. Which makes it feel less like a town and more like something preserved on purpose, a place that should have ended but never quite did.